the chilled northern reaches of Norway, there existed a tale of a forgotten city. Astra, it was called. Today, the space it supposedly occupied is swallowed up by verdant woodlands near my jurisdiction as a police officer in Solterra, a place speckled with towns and communities. But there were signs, strange echoes of my own lineage, pointing to the fact that this city wasn't just a myth. Its existence was inexplicably scrubbed from the collective memory of the world, and I was left pondering the unimaginable reasons behind such an anomaly. The unraveling of the mystery started on an ordinary day, with the intrusion of two blueberry pickers of Romanian descent into my humble office. Lost in translation and terrified out of their minds, they managed to communicate about an unsettling discovery they'd stumbled upon in the depths of the evergreen forest. Their disjointed sentences were punctuated with references to death, to a body, to the macabre. We procured an interpreter from the neighboring town who teased out their story. They'd found a child's body, not more than 10 years of age, laying bare under the canopy of the ancient trees. Alongside a few colleagues and an ambulance in tow, they led us to this harrowing sight. As the dying light of the setting sun was swallowed by the fog, I lit a cigarette and steeled myself for the task at hand. We ventured off the beaten path, and the tension in the air was palpable. I'd dealt with fatalities before, children as well, in the wreckage of auto accidents. It wasn't easy, but it was part of the job. This, however, felt different. The pickers stopped at some invisible threshold, fear painted vividly across their faces, refusing to take another step. They stayed behind with a colleague while the rest of us pressed on. We stumbled upon a colossal boulder, a legacy of the ancient ice sheet that had once blanketed Europe. One of my colleagues circled it, only to return shortly after, ghostly pale and on the brink of collapsing. Without uttering a word, he heaved the contents of his stomach onto the forest floor. Undeterred, I ventured forth, medics in tow, towards the grotesque tableau waiting for us. There, half merged with the mammoth boulder, was the body of a small girl, her blonde hair lying in stark contrast to the gray rock. It was as though she'd been a specter, solidifying midway while passing through the stone. Another more eerie perspective offered by my colleague was that she might have been teleported into the rock. Her vacant eyes gazed sorrowfully into the vastness of the forest, seemingly narrating a tale of unheard tragedy. The medics recoiled, aghast at the sight, the gravity of her final moments sending a chilling shiver down our spines. But I was drawn to it. I wasn't a man of faith, yet the sight of the girl fused into the boulder brought into question everything I'd once held to be true. It wasn't merely the inconceivable circumstances of her demise. There was an additional element of strangeness about her, a profound, aching familiarity that seemed to rip a piece from my soul, leaving a gaping void that rapidly filled with a previously unknown sorrow. Her face, though etched with terror, stirred within me the fleeting shadows of a forgotten dream. We gathered ourselves and endeavored to make sense of the extraordinary scene. The cold professionalism of our work offered a modicum of distraction, enabling us to focus on the tangible facts at hand. Clad in a pink jacket, the girl's pockets held two intriguing objects: a peculiar flower with vibrant hues akin to the iridescence of a beetle's wing, and a yellowed library card. The card bore a baffling inscription, "The Library of Astra," and beneath it was the girl's name, scrawled in a child's handwriting. Staring at the library card, my world began to tilt on its axis. The name scrawled in a child's script was like a hammer blow: Gabriella Connor Bennett. My colleague's questioning gaze settled on me as he pointed out the uncanny coincidence. Struggling to regain my composure, I could only nod. "Do you know her?" he asked, concern lacing his voice. I don't," I stammered, feeling the floor beneath me buckle. I had no memory of this child, this specter of an unknown past. The connection was pure happenstance, I insisted. My fellow officer remained silent, his skepticism clear. As we grappled with this disturbing revelation, one of the medics called our attention to another item unearthed from the blood-soaked moss, a notebook that must have slipped from the girl's lifeless hand. I gingerly picked it up, leafing through pages filled with tightly knit words in a different hand from Gabriella's. One of the medics interjected into my perusal. "Sir, We'll need some equipment to extricate her from the boulder. I murmured my consent, distracted by the conundrum unfolding before my eyes. There's another thing, the medic said, his gaze fixed on the crimson-streaked ground. There's too much blood. What do you mean, too much? I asked, the phrase echoing ominously in my mind. Beneath the boulder, sir, the medic clarified. It's impossible for all this blood to have come from a child. As silence descended upon us, I ordered a retrieval of the tools necessary for a more thorough investigation. The next day saw us returning, armed with gear and successfully removing the girl's upper body for examination at the morgue. Despite our best efforts, the boulder refused to budge even under the mechanical might of a crane. Digging beneath it revealed no additional remains. All we could do was collect blood samples from the scene. During the examination of Gabriella's body, I found myself engrossed in the notebook, captivated by the outlandish tale of the city of Astra it contained. I dismissed it as a delusional narrative crafted by the presumed murderer until the forensics lab delivered another shocking revelation. After running a DNA comparison between the girl and myself, a safeguard I'd insisted upon to preclude suspicion, they'd confirmed that the 10-year-old Gabriella was, in fact, my biological daughter. The impossibility of this truth was staggering. A decade prior, I was living with my ex-wife, faithfully committed and childless. 5 subsequent years of our life together had yielded no offspring. And yet, the DNA didn't lie. Left grappling with this bewildering truth, I decided to transcribe the contents of the notebook, the cryptic chronicle of Astra, in the hope that someone, somewhere, might shed light on the forgotten city and its inhabitants. The notebook started as such. 5 years ago, I was a man far different from who I am today. Younger, not only in age, but also in spirit. I held joy in my heart, hopes and dreams for the future. All of that was obliterated. I now find myself short on time, desperate to recount the calamity that befell us, our entire community. We refer to it simply as the event. It took place on June 15th, 2015. I was visiting Astra for the day to accompany my niece, Gabriella, to the grand opening of the Crimson Wood, the city's latest attraction, projected to be the largest amusement park in Norway. Gabriella's parents, unable to accompany her due to work, entrusted her to my care, a responsibility I held often. We arrived early, the excitement palpable. The weather was in our favor. The morning showers had cleared, leaving behind a cloudless sky. Gabriella's incessant chatter about the fun-filled day ahead was infectious, her happiness warming my heart. Our arrival at the park was delayed by a street closure for a military parade, a minor hiccup that served to heighten the festive air. To bypass the parade, we took a bus to the city center at Anderson Square, from where we rode the subway to the Amber Atom Trade Complex, home to Norway's tallest skyscrapers. From there, the Crimson Wood was just a walk away. Everywhere we looked, there were people. The place was teeming with life. It seemed that a good number had used a ferry to get to the river, something I wasn't aware of. This meant that we had to stand in line after all. Gabriella, being the ever-joyful child, didn't seem to mind. However, I knew her hunger would strike soon, and I worried that it might affect her mood. Fortunately, a vendor was pushing a hot dog cart down the queue. I bought Gabriella a hot dog and soda, an act her parents might not have appreciated, but I felt they would understand given the occasion. The vendor was also selling red balloons, and Gabriella insisted on having one. I tried explaining the inconvenience of carrying it around all day, but her determination was unyielding. With reluctance, I caved and got her a balloon as well. At this point, no one could have known that their lives were on the brink of an immense change. It wasn't long before Gabriella accidentally let go of the balloon. To my surprise, she didn't seem bothered. We watched as it rose into the air, becoming a small red dot against the azure sky, until suddenly it vanished. "Where did it go?" Gabriella asked. I was just as bewildered. It was as if it had simply evaporated into thin air. Perhaps it popped, I suggested, but an uncanny feeling whispered doubts. A few minutes later, a strong gust of wind swept across the area from all directions, bringing with it an unsavory, decay-like smell. "What's that smell?" Gabriella asked, her long hair dancing in the wind. The confusion was palpable. Joyous chatter had shifted to worried murmurs. An ominous sense of something unknown hung in the air, underscored by the distant echo of sirens seemingly from the direction of the business district. A woman pointed at the towering skyscrapers and said, "Oh my God, the top of the building is gone." Indeed, the highest point of the tallest building seemed to have vanished, as if sliced off cleanly. Fear reflected in everyone's faces, and even without seeing it, Gabriella sensed something was terribly wrong. Guided by instinct, I decided we needed to leave. The situation didn't seem safe. Gabriella teared up, but I reassured her that we would return later. We hurriedly boarded a ferry that was about to leave, and a few others joined us. Back on land, a commotion stirred the crowd. People began running in terror towards the water, a clear sign of them trying to escape something. It was a horrifying sight, and I was grateful that Gabriella was not tall enough to see over the railing. The sirens from the emergency alert system began wailing, signaling an impending catastrophe. Questions flew around, answers were scarce. A sense of panic spread, with some speculating about a terrorist attack or an assault from foreign forces. I tried to make a call, but soon discovered that the signal was completely down. Observing others, it was clear that no one had a signal. As we moved further from the city center, people were seen peering out of their windows, trying to make sense of the ongoing situation. The only visible anomaly was the cut-off building in the business district. Gabriella pointed at a large creature in the sky, a bird-like entity, black as pitch. It seemed just as perplexed by its surroundings as we were by its existence. After circling the city center a few times, it flew away, leaving us in sheer terror. Upon disembarking from the ferry, we observed a state of panic. Some were hastily packing their cars to flee the city. Some were running, possibly towards their loved ones, while others were huddling around law enforcement or military personnel seeking information. Amid the chaos, an old woman questioned the directive to listen to the radio when the power was out. Policemen advised us to return home, close the windows, and wait for the power to come back on, reiterating their lack of information. In the midst of all this confusion, a man on a loud motorcycle returned. He had attempted to leave the city earlier. Holding Gabriella close, I strained to hear his frantic report while trying to calm her. An immediate hush fell over the crowd as the man in the center of the square, standing atop the statue's pedestal, declared the unthinkable. "There's no way out," he shouted. "The main roads have been swallowed by impenetrable jungles. There's no way around it." His words echoed through the silence. Some dismissed him as delusional, but those who had witnessed the alien sky creature had no doubts, however inconceivable the situation was. "Then it's true," a police officer standing next to me muttered under his breath. At my questioning gaze, he reluctantly shared the last communication received from a helicopter surveying the parade. Something had cut off his rotor blades, and he reported the world around him had changed. He saw a jungle to the west and an ocean to the east before his signal was lost. Rumors started spreading like wildfire, each one painting the same inexplicable picture. Our city was an island, isolated in an instant from the rest of the world. Yet, everything within it remained the same, save for the foreign sky. When the sirens finally fell silent and the last car horn blared, an uncanny quietness descended. The entire city held its breath in the face of the unimaginable. Trying to explain the situation to my 5-year-old niece, Gabriella, was challenging. She was tired, scared, and missed her parents. We sought refuge in a nearby hostel, using money which we suspected might lose its value soon. That night, the sun set in the north, replaced by an unfamiliar blanket of stars. Its alien beauty failed to inspire awe, but instead intensified our feeling of displacement. A strange dichotomy was born, familiarity within the city streets and the dread of being lost in an unknown world. The first night brought a cacophony of panic, frantic screaming, gunshots, and a chilling, unidentifiable howl that sent shivers down our spines. We hid in our room, waiting for dawn, hoping the terror of the night would be temporary. The following days brought new realizations. The threats were not just from the mysterious jungle enclosing us, but also from the people within. Crime escalated rapidly, looting, robberies, murders, but complete anarchy was averted, thanks to the police and a few military units present in the city for the parade. Unexpectedly, the man on the motorcycle emerged as a leader. Under his guidance, cooperation grew within the population. Remaining food supplies were shared, work was distributed, and a semblance of order was restored. Scientists from the local university, with the help of citizens, managed to build a nuclear power plant to restore electricity. I found myself contributing to the project despite my lack of knowledge in nuclear physics. In these dire circumstances, we were uncovering our collective potential, and despite the dread, a strange pride swelled within me. Life in this unknown world was far from easy, but we adapted, survived. My personal challenge was ensuring Gabriella's safety and health, a task I managed to succeed in. In our precarious existence, 3 escalating issues started to cast a shadow over our community. The first and most pressing was the shortage of food and water. Resourceful individuals had managed to cultivate wheat and potatoes in parks and soccer fields. Yet this was far from sufficient. Although rain fell occasionally, apprehension over its safety meant few dared to drink it. As a response to this escalating crisis, expeditions were dispatched into the surrounding jungle in hopes of discovery. Regrettably, most explorers never returned. A few survivors did make their way back, but they were empty shells of their former selves, as though the jungle had snatched their spirits, leaving their unharmed bodies to wander back to the city. The second major issue was the encroachment of inexplicable creatures from the jungle. For the first few months, they remained at the periphery, but as we restored electricity, these alien entities seemed to take it as a challenge. They would venture into the city without any apparent rhyme or reason. Some simply walked through without causing harm, while others created havoc, wreaking death and destruction. The most memorable of these incidents involved an enormous centipede, ghostly white with countless crimson eyes. It emerged from a manhole, scaled a building with uncanny precision, and entered an upper-floor window. The screams from within were horrifying. Only a few escaped before the creature returned to the sewer, leaving a blood-soaked scene of carnage in its wake. These random attacks kept the city in a state of perpetual terror. The third problem, a health crisis, emerged later. Individuals across the city started falling ill with an unknown ailment that initially presented as a fever, but quickly spiraled into grotesque bodily mutations. In rare cases, these changes conferred some form of advantage to the sufferers, such as a girl who grew a third eye that she claimed allowed her to perceive others' emotions. As fear of the unknown gripped the community, these victims were shunned and treated as pariahs. It was noticed, however, that the monstrous entities from the jungle never attacked the afflicted. This observation led to a controversial decision: to send the sick into the jungle, not as an act of banishment, but to exploit their immunity. This turned out to be a significant turning point. The sick were able to bring back edible fruits, vegetables, and small mammalian creatures from their expeditions. Then, fortune smiled on us once again. After multiple failed attempts, we found fish teeming in the river, establishing a new source of food. However, this bounty came at a price. The arrival of fish was always accompanied by intense purple thunderstorms that battered the city for weeks. But we endured. Indeed, survival was possible. We weathered the tempest, the scarcity, the terrifying jungle creatures, and the health crisis. Over the course of the next 5 years, calamities were few and far between. Our focus on survival superseded homesickness, allowing us to endure the unimaginable. Despite the odds, we prevailed. We adapted to this alien world and carved out a semblance of life, displaying the indomitable spirit of humanity. As the days turned into years, even Gabriella found her thoughts drifting less frequently towards her parents. The strangeness of our predicament gradually became normality. Back in June 2015, the upheaval had driven some to suicide, but most chose to persevere in this alien world. However, 2 pivotal events brought about a change in the city's atmosphere. The first was a disastrous sea expedition. A large group, primarily men, resolved to brave the ocean on one of the luxury cruisers moored near the city, named Paloma de Esperanza. This venture, seen as a grand adventure and potential source of answers, ignited excitement throughout the city. Thousands, including Gabriella and me, turned up to see off the massive vessel as it sailed towards the horizon, just as we had done 5 years ago, waiting for the amusement park to open. We held our breath as the ship turned into a tiny speck against the setting sun. Our dreams of their exciting exploits, however, were brutally shattered when a gigantic creature emerged from the water and consumed the ship in a single gulp. This horrifying spectacle, revealing the existence of an entity capable of swallowing a luxury cruiser whole, struck a heavy blow to the city's collective spirit and hope. The second event, occurring a month after the loss of Paloma de Esperanza, was nothing short of miraculous. A military guard, a young man who was barely 15 when we disappeared from Earth, discovered that he could receive a radio station, named Synthwave Mix, from our former world while standing in a specific spot in Anderson Square. This discovery ignited a different kind of hope, one that hinged on the possibility of reconnecting with our loved ones and returning home. University researchers flocked to the area, attempting to trace the source of the radio signals, which they eventually determined emanated from beneath the square. As scientific investigations continued, the spot drew masses of people, each clutching a radio, hoping to catch a snippet of the familiar in this alien world. The crowd grew to the point where law enforcement had to intervene to give researchers the space they needed. However, a few days later, large speakers were installed at the base of the Anderson statue, connected to the receiver tuned into the elusive radio station. Day and night, the soothing, slightly melancholic synthwave music filled the city. People began to gather around the statue, even braving the dangers of the night. The music, while appreciated, was not the main attraction. Its origins were. Still, the synthetic melodies soon became a beacon of our collective hopes and yearnings. The square buzzed with life as people danced, their expressions a mix of joy and sorrow. However, the city would fall into a hushed anticipation whenever the radio host spoke, especially when they discussed the outside world. There was always a faint hope that they might mention us, discuss efforts to locate and rescue us. But our lost city of Astra was never mentioned, as if we had faded from the memory of our former world. Despite this silence, our faith remained unbroken. After long deliberation, the scientists decided to excavate at the spot where the radio signals seemed to originate. The task was arduous and fraught with danger, but everyone pitched in. Weeks passed as we dug deeper, not knowing what we were looking for, but unified in our conviction that it was something important. Eventually, we hit bedrock too tough to break through, leaving an enormous mound of earth piled up in Anderson Square. Our laborious efforts had not been fruitless. A tiny opening was discovered in the bedrock beneath the spot where the radio signals had been received. The site was cordoned off as the researchers approached it with caution. Their initial task was to determine the depth of this opening, a challenge considering the scarcity of sufficiently long ropes. After an extensive search, they managed to estimate its depth at approximately 700 meters. They proceeded to lower equipment down the opening, tethered to the rope's end. Bizarrely, whatever was sent down seemed to disappear into an abyss, as if swallowed whole, with no clue as to where it ended up. Yet the fact that only radio waves from our Earth emerged from the hole led us to a hopeful assumption. This might be a portal home. Celebrations erupted despite the lingering mysteries. More experiments were conducted and, while not all questions could be resolved, the consensus was that the hole was indeed a potential gateway to our old world. However, we faced two major obstacles. The first pertained to safety. Whenever an object tied to the rope disappeared into the hole, the rope was cleanly severed, reminiscent of the skyscraper incident 5 years prior. This raised concerns about individuals being similarly cut off. Fortunately, this issue was resolved when an experiment involving a camera connected to a ground-level screen revealed that the rope was severed only when retracted. The camera feed only showed darkness, assumed to be the other side, but it continued functioning until the rope was withdrawn. The second problem was the small size of the hole, which was too narrow for anyone to enter. Despite repeated attempts, the formidable bedrock proved impervious to our machinery. It felt like standing at the finish line without being able to cross it. In the midst of this frustration, one scientist suggested sending her 10-year-old son through the hole, as he was small enough to fit. This sparked heated debates before eventually gaining approval. The woman reasoned that Astra was no place for a child, and the hole seemed to be the only way home. The brave young boy accepted the daunting task. Equipped with a walkie-talkie, he bid his tearful mother goodbye and descended into the lightless 700-meter deep hole. He was instructed to send a message confirming his safety after reaching the other side. However, the call never came. In the following weeks, the boy's mother waited by the hole's edge, enduring scorching heat and relentless rain, tirelessly calling out to her son. It was unclear what had gone wrong. There was a possibility that other radio waves simply couldn't reach our world, but the hole was still deemed too unsafe for anyone else to venture. Yet for many, the prospect of returning home outweighed the dangers. The hole represented our most tangible hope in years. In a world fraught with threats capable of extinguishing our existence as effortlessly as a candle's flame, the risk associated with the hole seemed a lesser evil. Although guarded by the police, who largely shared the city's collective view, the hole was seen as an escape, if not for adults, then for our children. Today, I find myself in the room I've paid for 5 years ago, recording these events. Over the past few weeks, under the cover of night, countless parents have been sending their children down the hole. This world is unfit for them. They deserve better. Just like many others, I've made the decision to send Gabriella home. When I informed her, her eyes lit up with a joy I hadn't seen since our translocation to this desolate world. I've spent all day documenting our ordeal in Astra in this notebook, which I plan to give to Gabriella. I am confident that she will find a way to deliver it to her father. I believe, with all my heart, that she will find her way home to her parents. Soon, as night falls, I will accompany Gabriella to Anderson Square one last time. I apologize for the length of time it has taken. I'm sorry it took so long.